Welcome to Suba Unscripted, Power in Us. It's great to be back with another episode, and this time it's with Sindhu Rajasekaran. Sindhu is an academic, author, filmmaker, and she's joining me today from Toronto, Canada. Welcome, Sindhu.
Thank you so much for having me on, Suba.
It's really great to finally meet you, Sindhu. So this is really the first time we're talking.
Yeah, I know. We've been like sort of online, communicating online, but this is great. It's been lovely to chat with you.
Exactly. I'm really excited to talk about your book today. It's called Smashing the Patriarchy. And I was actually, I don't think I've ever told you that story, but I started reading your book while I was on a 2-week long Ayurveda retreat in Kerala.
Oh, I see. Oh my...
So I picked it up actually in Chennai, the book. And, I thought, smashing the patriarchy. So what a brave name. So I really have to somehow kind of start reading this. So I think being in India and reading it made it even more special for me. So that's also, and I reached out to you to say, how much I related to that book as well. We are both Tamil. I'm originally from Jaffna, and you being from Chennai. I think, a lot of these experiences do connect us. So for me, the first question is, how did you think, I have to write this book? So what was the triggering moment for you?
Okay, it's a tough question because, for the longest time, I did not want to see myself as a woman because I just thought, I'm just a human being. I'm just, I'm an engineer. I was an engineer, trained as that. And, I was gaslit a lot in my engineering college by my male peers. Would constantly make me question about what are you doing here kind of a thing, So all my life, it's been this struggle of like, I'm very dysphoric. I'm queer. So it's never been like, I've always been questioning who I am as a person. Like, does my womanhood define me? Is that me being female? Is that what I am?
Mm-hmm.
What is my contribution and all of those kind of questions? So when I started writing, I would just pick characters who were female in my stories because I wanted to explore what that meant. And then when the Smashing the Patriarchy came about in a very funny way because it was after my master's. I was in India working as a communication strategist for a bit. I was working with all these corporates and startups and things like that. And I'd come across a lot of these women, at the workplace, who wouldn't necessarily call themselves feminist, right? But they would be smashing patriarchy in so many ways. And then I started thinking about it, and also like, all kinds of women across the socioeconomic spectrum, like even in homemakers, who wouldn't call themselves feminists, but they would use the conventional sort of social patterns to break the patriarchy or to challenge the patriarchy. And this I found so interesting because they have no context, like they don't use the word feminism or they don't know any of the, theory behind it, but they'd just be doing that stuff, right? And that's what really got me onto this path of like, okay, what are these women doing? How are they smashing the patriarchy? Which is why the book does not have the word feminism on the cover, because I didn't want to make it about that, because it's not a Western sort of import of, oh, how am I applying this theory to India, but to see how are these women challenging these local structures based on their own sort of inherent, what would you say, subversive ideas.
I love how it came about because it's everything that you observed. And from my own experience, I've also seen a lot of women, especially younger women these days, do say, I'm not a feminist, but I think their very being or things that they're doing actually is a feminist act. But also, it's a very conscious decision from your side to call it smashing the patriarchy and not to say, it's kind of, it's actually quite interesting. That was one of the reasons I picked it up, because you see a lot of these titles that goes in the direction of, gender equality, feminism. And I think what drew my attention at the bookstore in Chennai is also smashing the patriarchy. I think that's quite an interesting move. And also the subtitle is a guide for the 21st century Indian woman. So it's also quite bold. And I think exactly things that you you talk to hundreds of women, and to also kind of to make it more deep, when it comes to their experiences. And from your arc, how you wrote it, can you explain me what you mean by patriarchy, also for our listeners, to say, in the Indian context, what are you meaning by patriarchy?
Okay, so that's very difficult thing, right? As an academic, there is a way that I see it. And trained in the sort of Western academia, I see it in a particular way of what it means and all of that. Now I think have started calling it the heteropatriarchy rather than just the patriarchy, because
Hmm.
also to say that the patriarchy wants the gender binary to exist. The patriarchy
Hmm.
wants to perpetuate the purity of its bloodlines for its own purposes. And so what it does is it confines those who are male-bodied to a certain, sort of social sort of act, as in what they're supposed to, do and perform. And
Hmm.
the patriarchy also subjects women to this thing of like, you have to be the childbearer, the nurturer, the protector of our bloodline. You have to be pure. You have to be
Mm.
the honor of my community, my caste, my
Yeah.
clan, my creed, whatever. So
Hmm.
what the patriarchy essentially does is that the basis of it is this gender binary, right? It has to keep this. And which is also why right now, if you see around the world, like in the West, in America, if you see in the UK, other parts of Europe, and in India, the sort of backlash against queer, rights, the
Hmm.
backlash against trans women, all this stuff comes from this sort of alpha bro, this sort of very, very hyper masculine kind of space, because the patriarchy is petrified of any power that comes from, femininity or trans, sort of sexual orientations rather than from hypermasculinity itself. So that's the crux of what I consider the
Hmm.
heteropatriarchy or the patriarchy to be, because it also means that it connects sexuality to certain modes of production, or it connects it to like, what is your role in society, right? What are
Hmm.
you allowed to do based on your gender? Like, who can you be? Can you be the ruler? Can you be, who can you be? So those are the things that I wanted to explore in the book. And I didn't tell you about this, but my next book that's coming out in the next couple of months, it's about India's feminist past, pre-modern. And I've been digging into like ancient and medieval stories for the last 5 years. And I have been fascinated to find how women have consistently on the Indian subcontinent resisted the patriarchy for thousands of years. And all these stories have been written over by, Brahminical patriarchy, Shamanic, Islamic, whatever, Victorian, nationalist. They've buried these stories, but Indian women and South Asian women have been fighting this. So yeah, so all of these things are what sort of, played into my head when I got into what the patriarchy means for me. It's not just like a colonial import of, oh, the patriarchy means this and this and this.
Hmm.
In
Yeah.
Indian context, it has so many axes along which it's defined.
Yeah, from an academic perspective, that's quite fascinating how you also kind of take this dichotomy, right? What it means for the Indian subcontinent, but also in the West. And really interesting to hear about your new book. And I would love to have another conversation. So once I've read the other book, and from your perspective, I think it's patriarchy has from a woman's perspective, I think both of us grew up in a Tamil household. So you in India first, and then of course you've migrated to a lot of different places also for your studies. And for me, mostly in Switzerland. I also did my undergrad in Canada. And I think you have all these different experiences. But when it comes to the home, how your being is at home, you are a Tamil girl that has, as you mentioned, is in a societal perspective has associated certain roles. I'm sure you've probably heard similar things like I have as well. As a girl, you're not supposed to do this. For instance, when I was a young girl, I really wanted to do karate, and I was not allowed to do karate. So my parents were like, Bharatanatyam is more suitable for you. I did love. I did love dancing, but that didn't mean, I cannot do any martial arts. I could do
Mhm.
both. So I think there were a lot of these things also when it comes to travel alone, how you are.
Mhm.
And so when did you know that you yourself are queer? And did you ever pick up that conversation with your parents?
I mean, it had to come up because I had a girlfriend when I was
Hmm.
16 years old, and everybody knew about it. So it was not like a secret kind of a thing.
Hmm.
It was like I was this like, very rebellious adolescent who was just like, I don't care what you think. I will live my life the way I want to. I was that kid. And
Yeah.
growing up in Chennai, this was in I don't know if you know about Section 377, which has been, revoked in India,
Hmm.
decriminalized. But when I was growing up, it was still a criminal act to be a homosexual in India.
Right. Yeah.
It was a really big deal, right? So they didn't. I was a criminal essentially.
Well,
Uh,
talking about this challenge for your parents, right?
yes,
They must have
exactly.
been, what are you doing?
So this was the funny thing though, because I was like the perfect Tamil daughter, right? I was like academically very good. I was a Bharatanatyam dancer. I was very good with like all of these like domestic things, like, oh yeah, you have some puja, whatever, I'll go distribute the whatever, I'll do all of that. But
Oh,
hello,
I
I'm
love it.
also gay, you know. So they were very confused as to what to do with me. And yeah, like my parents are very progressive, are very modern people, but I still managed to scandalize them, with my being. But the larger Tamil community that I grew up in was very conservative, of course, and very
Hmm.
casteist and very, gender binary was very much a thing. And yeah, colorism, beauty standards, right? Like
Hmm.
being told constantly that, oh, you're too thin. Like all my life, I've grown up being told I was too thin. Like, how will you have babies? How will you carry babies? Like, stuff
Oh
like that.
no.
And people tell me that, for some people I'm too
And
dark.
people you don't even properly know. That's the worst part, right? Even, I mean, it's already bad if you know them, but it's worse if it comes from people you
Oh
won't
yeah.
take any advice or anything. You don't even know them. So this is really can be a random person. I think for people who don't know, some of these cultural contexts, I think it can be as bad as someone who just meets you for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mean, it's not just like so. It's also with the larger Indian community, right? There was one time I was on this plane from London to India, I think, and there was this, man who was this uncle who was sitting next to me, and the first time we've ever met, like I don't know the dude, and he's like, he's asking me my caste. He's asking me my like. I'm like, I don't even know you,
Who are
and it
you?
just like just feel free to like you just ask me. So that's how Indians can be so they can pry into your sort of personal space and ask you a question. So yeah, growing up it was very hard, right? Like so in and to be this queer kid and to challenge all these norms without even knowing the language, because I did not know the civil rights language or the sort of
Right.
I didn't
Yeah.
know any of that. It was just this thing that, oh, this is who I am and I want to be me, and just let me be. I didn't have the language and I was bullied for that because I didn't know the language, right? So yeah, it's like the Tamil and the thing is, that's also the funny thing. The other side of the Tamil thing for me is that Tamil women are also very like proto-feminist, even without the language of feminism. They're very like matriarchal figures. So my
Hmm.
grandmother protected me. So in all of this, everyone's bullying me, morally policing me, and this grandmother, she would just stand up to everyone and dismiss them and say, "Let her be who she is. Like just let her be," And she held space for me. And this is my grandmother, who's this devout woman who do fasts, who do like she's this very religious lady, and she's the one holding space for me. And so that really made me question everything. So, here are these people who consider themselves really modern
Hmm.
folks, but they don't understand who I am or what I am. But this is very traditional lady who is sort of, making space for me, So, and that's what all of these things sort of came together in Smashing the Patriarchy, because how I look at traditional women or conservative women is not that they are like these victims, because they're also dealing with these patriarchies and being these full human beings, but in their own way. So yeah, it's very complicated.
Yeah, that's very impressive. I mean, first of all, impressive how you came out to understand, that you might be a criminal and you're just fighting for people to recognize who you are. And I think people like you actually brought up the steps for it to being decriminalized today, right? Like it needs that kind of act of courage, and people saying, we are humans and we want to love whoever we want, and we actually want to be recognized like anyone else. I think that's a very brave act. And the other thing is also what you're talking about. Also, now I understand more from the place of from where you wrote your book, because I think it was very clear you're not writing from a place of, patriarchy is oppressing us, we are being victims as women, but from a place of agency. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is again something to do with my foremothers. So I come from an intercaste family of Iyengars and Pariyas, which are Dalits and Brahmins, essentially. So they had an intercaste marriage, right? And so the narratives that are spun around women of these communities is always that they are the victims of the patriarchy. But like having seen my own foremothers, my grandmothers, and hearing stories of my great grandmothers from both sides of my family, they've been these matriarchal figures who stood up to all of these kinds of hegemonies all their life, and then so that completely sort of contradicted what I was told about my own self or my consciousness. What it does to a person's consciousness to be constantly told you're a victim, you are, you that's who you are. But to instead to think that, oh, actually, you know what, I have power within me. These are forces that are trying to oppress me, but I have this power within me, right? And so this is something I learned from my foremothers, my grandmother, my grandaunts, my aunts, like just watching them be,
And also your parents were brave to do that at that stage, right? So I think that you often see that. That's also very like something I find interesting, because your parents have been through that phase as well. They've been very rebellious, but then they end up almost oppressing you because they want to protect you. So how do you, because at the end of the day, I think they want you to accept for who you are, but I think they want to protect you from everything else as well. So how do you understand that narrative? Because if you can't, I mean, a lot of children probably feel, oh, I can be myself because my parents are not recognizing me, but it's also an act of love in many ways.
Yeah, because obviously it was criminal to be homosexual, right? So they were trying to protect me. They were like, "Is this who you want to be?" Like, I think I remember my dad saying this to me. He was like, I understand where you're coming from. I understand these are your desires, but then do you want to spend the rest of your life fighting everybody else to just be who you are? Want to do other things in your life because you're this academically, smart kid. You have all these ambitions. Do you want to spend your life doing this? I mean, that's how he put it from his perspective, right? But obviously that was my first love, and
like
I was
you're
just
putting more hurdles for yourself. He of course knows there are already a lot of hurdles if you're a woman in India. I mean, generally not only India, but I think if you're a woman in many places, it's difficult. And so he put it again from a perspective of love. Do you want to put more hurdles in your way?
Exactly. And that's the thing. So it was funny because, my parents were trying to, now that they've accepted me for who I am. I will say
Which
that.
is amazing.
Yeah, now they're on board with me, and so my life has been very strange because there was me, I was a lesbian in my adolescence. Then in my 20s, I gave men a chance because of all the social compulsion. I'm like, okay, let's give it a chance. Let's try men. And then I wrote this book. I'm like, oh my God.
I love it.
I was like, I don't think I was meant for this. Like, I don't think my body or mind was just like, I just can't do men. So in my 30s, I came back to being a sapphic. I found my love for women again. So now I'm back to being a lesbian. I'm just like, I just cannot. Like, I don't think I was not meant for men.
I think that's the best quote ever. I think. It's like, and also kind of your act of, I'm just going to write this book and I've had enough of it. And, it's just so fascinating, how you're putting it. And also, and again, putting this patriarchy into perspective, you have to explain that a little bit more, because patriarchy is not good for men either. Yeah. It also put men into a very difficult situation, like simple as, that they cannot cry, or, it can be sports, or it can anything in society, or don't do this like a girl. And I think a lot of women these days redefine that, right? Like in terms of sports, leadership, everything, women are outperforming at all levels, but which doesn't hold any truth. But patriarchy is not very positive, or has also put men into a position that they have to be in a certain way.
Absolutely. I was just going to show you my new book, Forbidden
Mm-hmm.
Desire. This one is what looks into exactly what you just said. And
Mm-hmm.
this was part of my PhD research. So
Mm-hmm.
I've spent years in the archives, in the colonial archives, looking at this, right? And what has been the most fascinating thing I've discovered, or a lot of academics have discovered this before me, I rediscovered it through them, is that India was actually very, queer, inclusive before the British colonized India. And all these laws that we have against, anything to do with sexual deviance were all brought in by the British. But before that, it was not that everybody in society was like, oh yeah, please be queer. It was not that. But if you were, they accommodated you into the social structure. And there is ample evidence to show this, through ancient, medieval, and early modern times as well. Just when you can see in the colonial moment when all these things shifted. And the other thing that you were talking about of how the patriarchy is bad for men, this is again very interesting, because when the British first came to India, or the Europeans came to India, one of the things that really scandalized them about Indian society was that there were so many women administrators, women rulers who would go to war, and so many men who were homosexual, so many men who were effeminate, they were trans women. They saw all of this and they've recorded it, because, we can't, it's all just fact, because the Europeans have recorded seeing all of this, and it's all in the archives. Like anybody can go look at it. And they were so scandalized by all of this. And then when they started colonizing India, one of the first things that they did was embarrassing or shaming the Bhadralok, or the Indian men, saying that, oh, you're so effeminate, you're not cultured, you're not, you're not masculine enough to be rulers or men at all. Look at your women, look at your society. It's so like primitive and like so sexually deviant, and they shamed the Indian men for this. And so Indian men who were not masculine to start with masculinized themselves for the British eye, because they had to
That's
prove
unbelievable. I think it's a scandal indeed.
I know, and it's in this book. It's in my book, and
Wow.
all the sources are there. Like it's not like it's in the archives. It's in the British archives. This is all stuff I discovered in the British archives, and it's like,
So in many ways they couldn't be themselves anymore. Say they needed, I mean, which we see in our times as well, right? A lot of men who want to open up, and we see that in a lot of the mental health conversation today. Men who want to open up. And I just recently came back from a trip where we met families of missing people in a war context, and a lot of the women who are looking for their sons. A lot of these associations, we asked them, so what about the fathers? And they said, in that society, this was Georgia, in that society from the war of the 90s and then one in 2008, mothers are still organizing as associations, and they're looking for their sons, and after nearly 30 years now, and they find a sense of community among themselves. A lot of men, they don't want to speak about it, and they didn't organize themselves in any sort of community. Most of them are dying earlier because they're not speaking about it, because they're just kind of how can you put it? I only can think of a German term, they kind of eating it inside, that it's really literally killing them. And they were saying, they can't really open up with their men to talk about it. And this goes exactly to that. It's in their society, it's not really manly to, to talk about this, to talk about the feeling. I mean, in this case, we're talking about the loss of their sons. So even in this context, they don't want to show it. And we see that everywhere now. And I'm really shocked to hear what kind of history we have where we were allowed to be human. So it's not even manly or womanly, just to be allowed to be human.
Yeah.
And, but we were not allowed to show it. I mean, I think once men read your book, this should be really, they should take back, to their emotions.
Yeah, you're right? Like, it's like, you think about young boys. As a mother, I know, because I'm constantly surrounded by little kids, boys, girls, whatever. And you see how sensitive they are, and they couldn't be, I mean, it's all about how society molds them, what it tells
Mhm.
them they are or what they should do, right? So they're such sensitive human beings, like as all of us are. And
Mhm.
it's about how we mold ourselves to be who we become, right?
Mhm.
And also the interesting thing is that, to just go back to India's the colonial moment, it's
Mhm.
not to say that India was paradise or something. It's to say that all these purist sort of patriarchies were there. They were they existed, but people are pushing back against that all the time. But what happened when the British came is that they gave power back to all these puritanical patriarchs of, like, say,
Mhm.
the Islamic fold or the Hindu fold. They picked the most puritanical version because it aligned with the Victorian idea of what it meant to be good, what it meant to be
Mhm.
civil, right? And they erased all these subcultures. So it's just so sad, because right now the way the world politics is turning, the same thing is happening, right? You see the
Yeah.
Alpha Bros in the US
Yep.
starting off things, and then it trickles into Europe, into Asia. It's just it's yeah, the decolonial, what do you say, the thing is, it's still relevant. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
We have
Mhm.
to do it.
Even more, right? I was a huge admirer of the former leader of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. Also, kind of the way she led, but also the moment she stepped out. And I remember some people were saying, she's rather a younger woman in her, she was, I think, in her 40s when she stepped a step down from her role. And she also became a mom during her once she was in parliament. And what I found amazing is you would hardly see a man who's in power to step down as well, to have the courage to say, to I mean, looking at, some of the context in this world right now, uh, a lot of the armed conflict are led by men in their nearly 80s. I mean,
Um,
they don't really have any sense
yeah.
of, that we have to survive or have any sort of peace because, for them, it's kind of outdated. But I think we need to have, younger people in power, but also, as you make the case in the book, the future is female, and I completely agree with you. And I think Jacinda Ardern is was a very interesting case for that, because I admired the courage to step down and to say, this to lead a country is such an important task, and it needs so much responsibility and a lot of energy. And at this moment, I don't have that anymore. And that's such a brave fact. And you don't see that, in a lot of the other cases. And you exactly make that case of, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that, how you see the power in women's leadership as well, because you made the case in your book that, exactly that nurturing element. I've been saying that actually in the different, my podcast episodes as well, because I genuinely believe in it, that some of the leadership skills that are associated with women. Again,
Mhm.
I genuinely believe this should also be the case for men. Men should have these, I think, as you say, men have these nurturing elements as well, but some are associated with women's leadership styles because it's softer, it's more caring, and again, there's a lot of men who lead like that as well. But what was your rationale to come to the conclusion we need more of that?
Um, Everything that you said, is so important to talk about, right? Especially in today's world where you see this sort of macho-ness going around,
Mhm.
calling itself leadership. But yeah, so one thing I would say is that since I wrote The Future is Female, I have thought a lot about it. And now say the future is femme rather than female, because I don't want
Uh-huh.
to make it gender essential in a sense, because I've
Yeah.
also find, like you said, we need men or male-bodied people who are more
Mm.
sensitive and feminine in their thinking,
Mhm.
in a sense, right? And I think that is very important. That's how we sort of queer the narrative, or like feminize everything, to move it towards a more caring and sensible kind of
Yeah.
leadership around the world. Jacinda Ardern is a great example, because I admire her too. For sure. Closer to your home, like, this is the thing about female women's leadership, right? You have Angela Merkel, for instance, or
Mhm.
you have You have Margaret Thatcher in the past, who was a conservative person, and she brought in a lot of repressive things. Like she was the one who made UK homophobic more than it was. Like she was the one who
Yeah,
brought.
she's very controversial. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like in
Mm-hmm.
India too, you have so many leaders,
Mm-hmm.
like Jayalalitha from Tamil Nadu,
Mm-hmm.
or like you have Mayawati, or you have, so many leaders who are all these tough women in these patriarchal situations.
Yeah.
Because New Zealand is a very different example, because it's like the whole society, the society as a whole has like tried very hard to progress on a lot of aspects on
Mm-hmm.
paper, at least, they have tried
Mm-hmm.
very hard to legislate and change things and all of that. You see a place like India where it's just like so hard to exist as a woman. And then you make her a leader, and all the sort of stuff that she has to deal with in order to even be a leader in that place, it automatically makes her a controversial
Yeah.
sort of a
Mm-hmm.
leader, right? Like you cannot expect her to be like so sensitive and sweet and nice and kind, because like if she did, they'd kill her the first day, like she'd be gone.
Yeah,
Like she
she
wouldn't
won't
even,
survive. Mm.
yeah. So it's so tough
It's
when you
true.
look at that.
Yeah,
Like
it's
even
actually true. Mm. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. You tell me, because I wanted to ask you, because you have more contemporary context on all of this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when
I
you
think,
see,
having been the CEO of two organizations more recently, I can tell you, at the beginning, I doubted myself because I had more of these female associated skills. But I think the more I was leading, the more I became more authentic and more, this is my style of leading. So, it's probably a combination of, of things that you would associate with a man or a woman. So I think I love that you raised the point of that as a Margaret Thatcher is indeed a very good example. Being a woman doesn't mean you're doing good for women.
yeah,
Right. It's the same with the leader of an organization as well. It's not like I'm only going to hire women, right? So,
yeah,
but at the same time, I would always be engaged to have the diversity in thinking. So that means the diversity that I need to lead this organization, whether it's a man or a woman. But at the same time, it is my role as a leader as well to empower and also kind of take away these hurdles for people along the way, to kind of make the system more inclusive. So that means, you include actually how a government should work or how the world should work. You just take the best people for the job and you make the context more inclusive. So, a lot of these examples that you brought in the chapter where you talk about women at work, I think I was really surprised. I don't know if the data is still correct. I think your book came out, I read it about 2 years ago. And you said it's about nearly 20% of the workforce in India is women. I mean, 20% of a country that is this large. I mean, it's what a lost opportunity. And it's just having more women's brain to grow. And it's about economic empowerment. It's about economic inclusion. So I think it's a lot of, talking about male terms, it just makes sense for the numbers having more women in business. So I think in that sense, I'm also very surprised that the people don't recognize that in many societies, that how, for instance, I've also worked in context where a lot of women, even North Africa, for instance, you have North Africa or Middle East, you have a lot of these very educated women, but unemployment is very high because they don't really participate in the workforce. And that's such a lost opportunity. And we're also not saying, I think, people like us, I think people think, oh, they all want to be ambitious, they all want, even if you have children, you can't stay at home and things like that. But I think in my case, what I'm advocating for is to have a choice. And I think to make also ambition look, it's good. It's fine to be ambitious. And I think that's coming back to the patriarchy conversation. Growing up as a Tamil girl in Switzerland, in my environment, I felt ambition was bad. And that's such a terrible thing to give a girl on her way.
Absolutely. And I've seen this it's just, it's been mind blowing, because in a bad way, because I have met so many successful women in India like in, they say, the corporate world, or, wherever, in bureaucracy even, and they would not call themselves ambitious because they think it's a bad thing. So
Ah,
they
yeah.
would, when I say, oh my God, you've achieved so much, like, look at you, like, whatever, if I hype them up, they would just say, like, oh, no, no, let's not, I'm not ambitious. I'm like, why are you being so self-sacrificing or whatever in your language? Like, why do you have to do that? But it's just coded into them. Like, that means you're a bad woman. Like, that means you want to hold on to power, or it's not a good thing for a woman, right? And as you said, even this thing of like being educated but not participating in the workforce, I think this has to do a lot with priming them for the marriage market. Oh, she's more educated,
Yeah.
so that she's good for the marriage market, rather
But
than,
not too educated, right? Not more educated than the groom.
yeah, imagine that.
Imagine
the
that.
Yeah, that guy's, self, his ego would be like bruised by that. Like, no,
True.
that's not okay. But yeah, it's like, and the thing is, again, I go back to the colonial moment, because I do like to blame the British for a lot of things. But what they did at that moment was that they brought in, I don't know if you know about this thing called the Contagious Diseases Act at that time
I
in
know.
India and in all the colonies. The British and the French both did it, actually. Was that all the soldiers and all their officers that they brought to these colonies, they would get infected with these venereal diseases, like sexually transmitted diseases. And it became a constitutional crisis because all these guys would take off work a lot. So then they wanted to know, where are they getting these diseases from? And then they started, setting up these places called lock hospitals to put all the sex workers who the soldiers were having sex with, to make sure that they did not have contagious diseases that are spreading to their soldiers. But then soon they figured out that even with all the sex workers registered themselves, because that was their job and they registered. But then these guys were getting these diseases from other women in colonial societies, who were laborers or who were courtesans or other men's wives, and like all sorts of women. And this scandalized the British and the French in all the colonies, that why are these, these native women so loose? They have loose morality. So then they brought in this coding. This is all real stuff, that they brought in this coding that any woman who is not in a monogamous marriage is a prostitute, and she has to register herself in the lock hospital. So imagine what this did to all sorts of independent women who were not with these patriarchal structures existed, right? But they were so conservative and so narrow-minded. Women broke out of them and they lived independent lives. They were like business women or like laborers, soldiers. Women were soldiers. Women were all sorts of medicine women. They did all these jobs in Asian and African societies. But when these colonial powers put all of them as, marked all of them as prostitutes. So then they forced the Indian patriarchies, the puritanical ones, to sort of reclaim all these women and say the only way you can exist as a good, honorable woman is to be a wife. You cannot have a job, like you cannot be independent. Then you'll be a prostitute, So this is what they did to Indian society, right? And so we're complaining now that only 20% of our workforce is women. Why would women not work? Because, it's not considered dignified to work, because then who can trust you or your dignity as a woman, right? Who knows who you're flirting with at work, so these are the kind of things.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. So it was directly related to, I'm learning so many things about, I can't wait for your new book, and how much is in the origin of the colonial past of India, how much it has changed. I think, even like simple examples like sari blouses, right? I think sari blouse was invented during colonialism. I think, it wasn't even to make women in India look more decent, because they were walking around sari blouseless. And I think now we're probably going back to a kind of completely reversed, right? Like now wearing bikinis or swimsuit is just kind of almost criminalized. So it's a very strange world. But
And isn't the thing about India,
go ahead.
the interesting thing about India is that India is like, so it's not like a straight linear kind of a thing, right? Because they get stuck to things They're still stuck with ancient and medieval things. The stuff that came in colonialism, India is still stuck with Victorian morality. The rest of the world may have moved on, but they're still stuck, So,
but conversations, I think, the younger generation, women like you, clearly challenge that, right? And are there conversations happening inside the country at places that have power and influence? Do you think there will be, society will change in some ways?
The last time I was in India, I was there in December to promote the book and everything. So I went to Delhi, I was in Bangalore, Chennai, and Kerala. And all these places, I am very happy to point out, women are so, bold. And well spoken, and they have the capacity to change things, obviously. And they are talking about all of these things, about the past, about the future, about the present. And, they really want to do that, right? But obviously, as you know, the current government in India
Mm-hmm.
is a bit sort of, what do you say, edgy about a lot of affairs and lots of
Mm-hmm.
matters. So there is a lot of repression coming from there. Like even things like social media posts are taken down. Like people cannot, if
Mm-hmm.
they critique the state, it's taken down. So if people have to be very careful, right? They cannot
Mm-hmm.
critique the state, but they can critique other sort of social elements, whatever. If they critique religion is a problem. So it's only, but the hopeful thing for me, at least as being a Tamil person, is that Tamil Nadu is not standing up to this
Mm-hmm.
bullying. It's standing up to this idea of this. What India is not this. This is not this Bharat or whatever this is. This is not what India. This is not the India we signed up to be part of. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And they are standing up to that. So you see that in Bengal too. You see Kerala. You see certain bastions of, progressive power where people are standing up to this and saying, no, this is not the India that
Yeah.
and so these
Mm-hmm.
spaces are safer for women to articulate themselves, to speak their minds, to work towards say legal protections. But in a more central level, I think it's very difficult right now because of the
Mm-hmm.
current situation. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I mean, what you're addressing is also a major issue globally, when you think of existence, or if autocratic regimes want to thrive, they always start with oppression of women. Right, that's
Mm.
how it starts. I mean, looking at Afghanistan, or even talking about sexual and reproductive rights in the States. I mean, there's a lot of places where we would consider it to be advanced. The first question, why would a woman's body be a conversation of only white males, right? So I think there's a lot of these edgy topics that are coming up, but from not all autocratic regimes. But I think that is a place to start, because they don't want them to be part of the society. And I mean, Afghanistan is one of those examples where they start with education of girls, participation of women in society. I mean, going as far as who they should travel with, who they speak with, how they exist. I mean, really to the extreme. But there are these milder cases, or some other minor cases you see anywhere else. And I think that's where I think governments have to be more inclusive, and women like you and who think like you should actually be part of these conversations at the global level, but also at the government level. And coming back to your book, you were saying, coming back to the agency question, I think colorism and how these things are portrayed in the media is also one of these things that I also often get annoyed, and I don't even feel like sometimes watching any of those Bollywood or Collywood or Tollywood, Mollywood movies, because talking to you, I see a segment of the Indian society, but what you see in the films is not representing what also kind of the voices are. It actually goes back to, the patriarchy that you're trying to smash, or you're encouraging to smash. So what is your take on the media, social media, or the film industry?
So when I was growing up, I remember this, which is when I consumed a lot of Tamil content or like Bollywood content. These days, I'm actually not watching much at all. But there were all these Rajnikant movies, right? If you remember, there would always be this evil vamp.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd be very attractive.
Neela Ambari, right?
Yeah, yeah. So she'd be this
The classic.
attractive,
Yeah.
fair-skinned woman
Mm,
who this dark hero would go and tame, and like,
I know.
so it's like the shrew, right? Taming of the shrew, kind of the trope was that. But yeah, so it's like the heroes will be dark, but the heroines will always have to be super fair, because that's the way that it just shows who desires who, or the sort of complications of
Mm-hmm.
desire, all of those kinds of things, right? Also caste, class, all those kinds of things, linguistic markers. It shows a lot of things about Indian society is with what pops up, right? Even it's so interesting because in the 90s, I think, is when the Shah Rukh Khan era, or like the era
Mm-hmm.
where it was all about these lover boys who would, go and try and like they were trying to be nice, sweet boys who would romance the woman or whatever. And then it changes, right? And then you have these item numbers, and like, you have like women just becoming these, on screen, like for just consumption, like they're just for sexual consumption on screen. Um, but it's very interesting because what I call post-feminism, right? A lot of women knew that this is what's happening. These women who are acting in, like, all these women who are dancing as item numbers, especially in the post 2000s, like you say Deepika Padukone or like Priyanka Chopra, or all of these women, they know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what they're doing, and they're getting paid for it, so they don't mind.
Yeah.
So it's like how they're using those tropes. But yeah, it's like it's very confusing for me, like
Mm-hmm.
how to analyze the filmography of India. It's like, because you see it's a range. You see, Malayalam movies are like, can be so progressive, and like they can be so gender equal, and they tell very complicated stories.
Yeah.
Tamil Nadu has like, it's just all violence, and like, everyone who wants to become a politician makes movies to show how socially progressive
Mm-hmm.
apparently they are, you know.
That's
Uh,
very timely. We're awaiting the results tomorrow, right?
yeah. So it's bizarre, it's really, and,
Yeah.
and in all of this, the way women are represented,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a whole different story. But I'm very happy that nowadays a lot of women are making films. They're not so high budget maybe, but they're
Yeah.
all telling these very diverse stories, right? They just need the right producers or the right studios to back them up, which doesn't happen as often, but
Yeah.
they're definitely making amazing content. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way that you can deny that. You just have to go dig deeper and look
Yeah.
harder,
Mm-hmm.
but it's there.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So they need to get more visibility and also more investments in those stories. And even, some of the things you mentioned in our conversation today, I'm hearing this for the first time. So I think these are things that should be out there in terms of more common or mainstream storytelling. I think what frustrates me sometimes is, I think, at where I am at my stage of life, or where you are, I think you can filter when you look at some of the movies. I can watch, whenever I get a chance, to watch one of these kind of masala movies as well. But I exactly know. So that's why, like, your example about Priyanka Chopra is interesting. I can't imagine anyone more feminist than her, what
Yeah.
she's done with her life, right? So there is this, where they are at the stage of their career, but what they do in the movies, and they sort of filter it. And the same, we do it as audience as well. But I am just worried what these mainstream things do younger generation. For instance, Switzerland is a good example. I think, being someone Tamil from Sri Lanka, I mean, we have our own complicated past as well, right? So we are very much into, kind of keeping our language alive. But I think what people think, or what the parents try to do, is, oh, watching a movie is keeping your language alive. So I think, you can do a lot of readings, you can do a lot of studying, but watching a Danush movie is not a language lesson to you. So I think, so I get frustrated when I see a lot of these younger people kind of talking in those idioms or things that you hear in street language, and someone who was born in Switzerland. And I think it's doing something to a wider social fabric, which I'm really worried about. And I think people like us would probably go deeper into digging some of these stories. But as long as these really empowering stories or real stories get out, you hear. I can watch any of the movies. I feel like the narrative is always the same, right? Like, it's exactly what you explained, right? Like, it's a hero who's darker, kind of pursuing a younger woman, and she says no at the beginning, but she turns around and always kind of marries that guy. And that also, very worrying about, like, talking about topics like consent and, no means no. I mean, there have been very interesting movies as well that really, which don't get as much attention like the others, but there have been interesting movies made. But I feel in India particularly, the medium is so powerful. So it's so powerful that it goes beyond the continent, right? So it comes into our living room. And I think that's where I'm really, really worried about. You live in Toronto, one of the largest diasporas of Tamils in the world, actually. So how do you experience that in Toronto?
So this is the interesting thing about mass, entertainment, right? So the Tamils are very good at that because
Hmm.
Tamils are very techy.
Hmm.
They are able to manipulate the latest technologies. They can integrate that. They know how to relay their, stuff, and which is good and bad, because what's happening is that also from a political perspective, we are like, as Tamils around the world, we are so well connected in so many ways that even though India's, political situation may whatever is going on, they can say things and critique it in ways in a very global way without the
Hmm.
center even knowing about it, because the language is different. There, we have
Hmm.
our own systems of communication, so it's a good thing. But
Hmm.
obviously, when it comes to things like sexism, the misogyny of Tamil society,
Yeah.
and all of that, which also gets relayed in this way, and nobody is, you know, critiquing that in a sense. But the good thing is, the hope that I have, at least as a Tamil engineer myself, and as knowing a lot of Tamil women who are in the filmmaking industry or in technical spaces, who are it also a lot to do with, like, what's going on in the internet right now, like who's controlling the sort
Yeah.
of the sort of stuff that's getting all around the internet, right?
Hmm.
And women are in all these places. And I feel like now is the time where they're coming into positions of power.
Yeah.
Because all this time, like, we've also had to deal with the patriarchs in our lives, at work, who have held the ropes of power, right? So now is when these women who have dug deep and who care about all of these things are coming into positions of power. And I
Hmm.
think they will do their bit,
Yeah.
and I think we should give them some time, and we should trust that. And we should, as feminists, as women, like, I think our job is to give space and platforms for that, and to sort of support those kind of women when we come across them. It'll
Hmm.
happen. I believe in it, like I truly do. But like I said, it's just who puts the money behind what. So if you
Yeah.
have like this really feminist movie, and you have
Hmm.
this mass like masala movie, who is the big studios, who are they going to fund, right? Who
Yeah.
is Universal going to
Mm.
fund, or like Sony, who are they going to fund? So it's to do with that, yeah.
So
But I
we have
have,
to make enough money that we make the movies. So I
yes,
think, design that. So that's kind of one outcome. And I think absolutely. I think it's really the power behind those investments that also goes beyond. I mean, entrepreneurship as well, right? When we think
yes,
about women-led entrepreneurial ventures, it goes back to that because women are also not that good with asking for money. So I
yeah.
think, it's all, there's a whole system behind it. I think everything that we're talking about, it goes beyond the Indian subcontinent, but also globally, how we can get to places of influence to invest in relevant narrative and stories that go global. And
Right.
at the same time, coming back to some of the things that you're writing in your book, also the workplace. How can we design the workplace to be suitable for women? I mean, you're a mother, I'm a mother. A lot of workplaces are not designed for working moms. And I think
Mm.
there comes the question of, it's either or, what feels fulfilling for a woman. If you're ambitious, you should be able to work and to be able to do things that fulfill you. I think in that context, women can play a huge role. Women leaders. To design workplaces or systems that can accommodate women. And I think that holds true to any of the contexts. And just kind of at the, I think we have to close soon, but I think one of the things that maybe you can mention closing is also kind of what is your power? We talk about, especially this podcast is named Power in Us. And you've mentioned so many intriguing things of how you as a being, right? You have power in your being. You have found that out, and I think we should do a separate podcast just to talk about you being born and until you're 16. I think that's kind of a whole different narrative how that
Yeah.
went. But what would you consider to be your power and something? And maybe quickly, how you found that out? How did you unlock that power?
Thank you for that question, Suba.
Mhm.
I think for me, it would be my words when I write, because I think it's the place that I'm most honest, because I'm not doing it for anybody, right? I'm not trying to impress anybody or even myself. Like, I'm just trying to be honest with myself, right? So I think that's how I even came to discover it, because like you said, like till I was 16, like in my life is so chaotic in a sense that I wanted to make sense of myself. Like, who am I? Like, everyone's saying this is who you should be, whatever, whatever. But when I sit down and write what I feel, what I think, what I'm thinking, who I am, I think that's most honest and most powerful place to be. So I think for everybody, I think writing is a place where you're like just focusing on yourself.
And when did you discover that it's words, that you love writing and that's where you're honest?
I think that would be around that time, about
Yeah.
14, 15, is when I started writing, thinking that, oh, I'm going to be a writer kind of a thing, so that would be the time I started. Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. I'm loving it. And I think one of the reasons I reached out to you was actually even before I thought even about having a podcast, right? So I think, my ambition was more woman to woman. I just wanted to let you know that your book spoke to me. And now having met you and having had this conversation, I feel like, I could go another hour just talking to you. So this is fantastic. And I think, and not in writing, but I think even in the way you articulate it, the way you show up and the way you're honest, I think it's, just keep being yourself. And just as a fellow Tamil, I'm really proud because I love seeing other women shine. And I think if it's a fellow Tamil, I love it even more. And the power to say, that you're lesbian, I know a lot of people cannot do that. So I think I just love that fact. And I hope you go next level in your career. And I look forward to reading your next book. And I'm sure we can have a separate conversation around that. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me, Suba. And I really admire you and your work as well. So you keep shining as well and keep
Thank you
doing the
so
good work.
much. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Sindhu. This was Sindhu Rajasekaran talking about her book, Smashing the Patriarchy. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. She really opened up in the conversation, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. This was Suba Unscripted, Power in Us.